So what we would recognize as a human being would start around Lemuria.
Exactly.
Now, is it true that...
But actually, we wouldn't recognize them because they were vastly different to what we are today. We are far more refined in our physical forms today. And also, of course, they were gigantic creatures back in those days.
Okay, so they were the giants.
They were huge, and they only had one eye on the top of their head, if you can imagine that.
Cyclops.
Well, yeah, and a lot of the Cyclops are usually in art are depicted with the eye and the forehead, which is probably inaccurate. Two-eyed sight, we were told, only started to grow, to evolve in human beings in early Atlantis.
Oh, okay.
The Lemurian giants were the one-eyed Cyclops.
So even though they split into genders, they still only had one eye?
That's right, and it's important to understand that humanity were hermaphrodite before the sexual separation period.
Yeah, Blavatsky argues that you can see it in the development of the fetus.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Yeah, I just said that Blavatsky argued that you could see it in the development of the fetus.
Yeah.
You could see the evolution of mankind in
Exactly.
the fetus.
Yes, you can, and the study of embryology would yield a lot of information for anyone who was so inclined to trace that evolution. Yes.
Would this eye that they had, would that be a function of the third eye or the pineal gland?
Well, the third eye is technically to do with the pituitary gland, but yes, it would. And that eye at the back, towards the back of the head, we're told, just from the crown towards the back, was an all-seeing physical eye and spiritual eye, and that eventually receded back into the brain over a few million years, and that is something that we can see in newborn babies, where the fontanelle hasn't closed over of the skull, and the actual pineal gland at the center of the brain is the remnant of that eye, of that first eye, as opposed to the third eye, you could say. But that Lemurian, back in that, my next book is going to be called Geography and Giants, where I trace the transformation of the continents and their change over millions of years. So the Lemurian, the extension through the Atlantic went down around what we now call Africa, but that Africa wasn't there before. Only part of the northern part of Africa was there. Around through Madagascar, because Madagascar was part of that original Lemuria, across the Indian Ocean to Australia, and then across the Pacific Ocean. So the actual origin, Blavatsky does say, was in the northern regions, and there are many proofs, geological and otherwise, for that.
Yeah, because we live on Norway. Maybe whole of Scandinavia is actually on what's called the Caledonian mountain range,
Exactly.
which is one of the oldest on Earth. So that could make sense.
Yes, Scotland, parts of Scotland, and so forth.
Which is why it's called the Caledonian, because that's I believe that's the word for Scotland in.
Oh, okay. Oh, very interesting. Yeah. But at one stage, the largest landmass was across the Pacific Ocean, extended. Australia is the largest surviving remnant of that landmass, and we have hundreds or thousands of islands scattered across the Pacific, which are all parts of that old Lemurian continent. So particularly Easter Island, for instance, is part of that old Lemurian continent. Hawaii, various islands throughout the Pacific have these ancient artifacts, statues, buildings, monoliths.
Yeah, on Eastern Island, it's obvious.
They're all Lemurian, but not just Easter Island, but many other places. People like David Hatcher Childress have done wonderful work in going through all those places and exploring them and taking pictures and putting them into books and so forth.
Yeah, we're going to interview him. But we did talk with Robert Schoch, and he's very interested in the Eastern Island, and he argues that these giant statues are very, very old. So that's corroborating your stuff too, if you say that that goes back to the giants, the Lemurians.
Yes, well, I'm glad Robert Schoch does say that, because, I mean, he's a bit of a skeptic on some things.
Sure.
He's a hardcore geologist, scientist.
Yeah, he has to stick to the mainstream paradigm as much as possible,
Well, he doesn't have to, but anyway.
Well, if he wants to keep his work, I guess.
The statues on Easter Island, Blavatsky says, when Captain Cook discovered, quote unquote, those statues were 10 meters or 30 feet in height. And she says that they were the actual height of the giants that existed on that island about 4 million years ago. And
only 4 million?
Yeah.
I thought the giants were living at the same time as the dinosaurs, because everything was bigger then.
They were, and there's been proof of that, of course, in the Peruvian Ica stones, the carvings, where it shows human beings battling with dinosaurs. But, the whole extinction of the dinosaurs paradigm of 65 million years ago, I think, is incorrect.
Yeah.
And it's more like 21 million years ago, around about the time of individualization of humanity.
Right.
And I say this because we are told in the ancient teachings that there was a huge electrical storm that was created in individualization. This was literally the spark of mind or manas was being imparted to humanity at that time, and it destroyed most of the animal kingdom. And that was the true death of the dinosaurs. And it didn't come about through any particular cometary crash into the planet. It was more to do with this electrical storm.
Right.
And from that time onwards, the refinement in the physical vehicle became more and more so as the consciousness developed, which only stands to reason, doesn't it?
Indeed.
The more refined the consciousness, the more refined the body, the less large it has to be. And Blavatsky says, though, even halfway through Atlantis, the giants had reached their an acme of physical development, of beauty, and had all the secrets of heaven and earth within them. And so, there were various stages where basically the diminution of the heights of the giants paralleled that of the reptile kingdom. So there were probably still dinosaurs around for a long time after the major death.
Yeah, remnants, right?
Yes.
We call them dragons in mythology.
But even all the other species probably weren't killed out entirely, so they were around for several million years, I would imagine. Even stories up into recent times, as you say, of dragons and so forth. So.
And what about Loch Ness? And we even have a Loch Ness monster here in Norway. I don't know if you know, it's in Seljo. It's a water.
Okay.
So there's observations of these kind of, it reminds us of aqua dinosaurs,
And exactly. And, this parallel, however, of humanity and the reptiles I think holds well all the way through to present day. So we have our alligators and our Komodo dragons and so forth. And we have our humans who are still quite tall. We still have giants on the planet.
Yeah.
People who are 9 feet tall, and there are many stories in the last few thousand years from Greek, Roman mythology and universal mythology, really, that talk about various giants that were.
God, it must have been terrible to be a giant in the age of the small man.
Well, we were all giants, but however, we are told by Blavatsky as well that there were parallel races of dwarfs as well.
Right.
So we had opposite, and this is going right back to Lemuria, I think. For instance, the Australian Aborigines, the Papuans, the Vedas of Sri Lanka, and the African Bushmen are regarded as the oldest remnants of the Lemurian race.
Mm.
And so you have, as you say, some of those individuals living the traditional ways and still expressing the culture.
But hang on, how could Bushmen, for instance, be a remnant of Lemuria if Lemuria were giants and Bushmen are the opposite?
Well, the Australians aren't the Aborigines aren't giants either.
No.
Their size has decreased in parallel with all the rest of us.
Right.
Those periods of time, so that they don't have to be giants, but it shows also the distribution. These races, these ancient races, are remnants of, and showing the distribution of where the continent of Lemuria covered. For instance, it was near Africa, and part of Africa at one point. especially the Madagascar, Mauritius area, but not so much the other part of the continent of Africa, which came up at different times after Lemuria. We've been told by Blavatsky anyway. So in my next book called Geography and Giants, I hope to map this out to show the transformation of these continents and island continents and the habitations of the various races and giants associated with them.
I still say it must have been bad being a giant in the area of small men. I mean, could they even breed with us? Wouldn't they be too big?
I'm not sure whether you, the thing I'm not sure whether you really understand the way I see this, Al, is that we're all giants, and there are mainly gigantic civilizations, period, in the past.
Yeah, but weren't there, an overlapping time
There was, and as in the Bible it says, the sons of men saw the daughters as being fair and all that kind of stuff. There was mating of much larger species with much smaller species, and these stories extend in many traditions. For instance, the Easter Island giants, the Lemurian giants on Easter Island, were eventually kicked off by the degenerated giants from Atlantis, because Atlantis and Lemuria overlapped each other, of course. And those particular giants from Atlantis left Easter Island and went to the mainland. And there's a story that's brilliantly covered by an anthropologist of a tribe in South America, that I think it might be Ecuador, that has this story of how the giants came to the village and basically ate up the inhabitants over a period of years before they could finally...
Literally ate them?
Yes.
So they were cannibals?
Yes, they were cannibals. And the villagers eventually dug these pits to trap them and kill them over a period of years, but not before these giants had also bred with some of the women.
Right.
And these giants had 6 toes and 6 fingers, which is a common story that you hear in all the giant stories around the world. And this tribe to this day has 6 fingers, 6 toes. Many of the people in those tribes have 6 fingers, 6 toes. Plus, they are the most violent tribe probably in the world. The murder rate and the violence is extraordinary, apparently. And it's like a hand down from these violent giants. They're incredibly violent, apparently. So we have the good giants and the bad giants of mythology. There's truth in that. Atlantis was destroyed because the civilization had abused its God-given powers. It had abused magic, sex. The incidence of theft was one of the greatest crimes apparently on Atlantis, and so it was finally brought to an end quite dramatically with the first Atlantean flood, the first of 4 floods, which occurred over a period of almost 4 million years.